All Things Unexplained. Hosted by Dr. Mounts.
Let's face it, we were always ready to roll without him anyway.
CJ Derringer.
Ain't nobody perfect, right?
And Smitty Neebs.
I've never planned out hardly anything my whole life. I just freeball.
Featuring Cajun Man.
I'm just old nobody, somebody looking for somebody.
Previously on All Things Unexplained.
One account from the article, and Dane, you'll appreciate this. This was actually relayed onto the show Coast to Coast AM, and I'm going to use this as a segue in a second. Dane has some good history with Coast to Coast AM, but this fella, and he only went by and it was actually on a Coast to Coast AM episode, July 15th, 2016. A man who only called himself Gene, and he claimed he was hunting for elk early in the morning on a border town around Arizona. Of course, we hear a lot of UFO activity coming out of that area. And at some point, some wild horses came thundering through. And Gene, the hunter, ended up at the top of a cliff area. And he could sense something was stalking him, right? And he got down from there and noticed a stereotypical Bigfoot at the top of this cliff area. Way up there, he says the Bigfoot jumps down from the cliff and must have been 150 to 200 yards away. It hurls an 8-pound or so rock at Gene. So he's telling George Norrie this on Coast to Coast AM. He said, the thing was huge. It would have killed him with the rock if the rock had ended up hitting him. And he actually lines him up in the scope and aims down the scope, gets a shot off, and hits the Bigfoot, okay? To make matters more fascinating, the Bigfoot takes a couple of steps and disappears into thin air. So Gene gets down there. There's large footprints, no blood or anything, but besides the footprints, no trace whatsoever.
Did he take pictures of the footprints or anything, or was this semi-recent, or is this
It's July 15, 2016. I don't think cell phones had been invented at that point. At least not on the Arizona-Mexico border.
Well, it's a heck of a story. I mean, those are, it can leave a lot of doubt, but if that's the story, it's, hard to debate with it a lot. So he was trying to kill it, though. Huh? He saw Bigfoot and says, "I'm gonna shoot it."
Oh yeah, he probably saw dollar signs.
So I read that
there.
article, and he said he did not want. At first, he had no intention of shooting the Bigfoot. That there was no threat. There was no reason to do so. It wasn't until this huge thing threw this 8-pound rock 150 yards at him and nearly missed that he turned around and took a shot.
Oh, so that justified it. Okay. Huh. Yeah, that kind of makes pulling the trigger
self-defense, we'll call it.
And he said he hit it. So
he did hit it, but it phased on out of there. Got phased up into the mothership or somewhere, or stepped into a portal. And a lot of people do say, well, okay, we do have all these cell phones, right? Why are all the pictures fuzzy? Why are they all grainy? But, even if it is a leap of logic, that would explain to some degree if Bigfoot is an interdimensional, portal, traveling alien, why he is so hard to catch on camera.
I mean, that would explain it.
Now,
although if he is caught on camera, does he have some type of, radiation around him that diffracts light a little bit, to why you can't get a clear picture?
or back to the cloaking. This makes me wonder, and I
That's
don't know
right.
why I'm thinking about this, but do you think more people believe in Bigfoot or in aliens? Or I suppose in this case, one and the same.
I think aliens. Yeah, I'm myself more of a Bigfoot skeptic, um, but open-minded about it, and I'm definitely a lot more open to the possibility of aliens, and I think I hold a lot of people's opinion on that.
So, in all of your
Um,
time out on the reservation, growing up, riding horses, growing up outdoors, no Bigfoot sightings for you.
no, none for me. Yeah, no Bigfoot sightings, and actually, so on the reservation, the Blackfeet reservation, the tale there, and there's hundreds of people through the years, and this has gone on through Blackfeet calligraphy, painted on old teepees and onto traditional storytelling. But their figure is Goat Man,
Oh,
and he's like a half goat, half man who lives more in the prairie, but has horns, and it's big. I actually have a Facebook site. I think it's called something like Reservation Creatures. I'll need to bring that up. Anyways, and a lot of people in that area, they know about Goatman. There's all kinds of tales of them. I mean, some believe it started as, grandmothers having, making sure their grandkids are in on time,
yes.
because Goatman will get them. But there's been people saying that, hey, they heard they were in their trailer and the wind was blowing and it was 20 below zero and it was half a blizzard, and they heard something walking on the roof, and they went up and they saw the Goat Man look at him and jump off the back and take off, and then they'd found dead calves or sheep the next morning that had been eaten on, when all the bears were hibernating, and it didn't look like it could have been a wolf or a coyote. So that's a version of chupacabra or a Sasquatch or a Yeti, that has now gone on for several generations. I don't think they've found Goatman's body yet, or any of the Goatman people, and
Mhm.
I hadn't thought of that if it's just one Goatman or if it's a actual species.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that about the grandmas possibly being the ones to pass this along, because I'll never forget. This was a couple years ago now. I was taking my two daughters at the time to a music class, and I would help the teacher at the end clean everything up. And so that meant that my two kids were sort of left to their own devices as I helped to clean. And trust me, if I ever leave them to their own devices, it does not go well. So at one point, my daughter is standing on a chair facing backwards. It's about to tip over. And I'm in the presence of company, so I'm trying to remain a calm, cool, collected mom. And I'm telling my daughter, okay, you need to get down. That's not safe. Please get off the chair. Come down off the chair. None of it's working. Meanwhile, my blood pressure's rising and I'm starting to sweat and wanting my child to behave and also not wanting to curse at my 2-year-old in front of strangers. And so, next thing I know, the music teacher says to me, you know, in the Native American culture, they don't give their children a reason to get off the chair. They just use scare tactics. So she turns to my 2-year-old and looks her dead in the eyes and says, if you want to get off of that chair, a monster is going to come out of it and it is going to eat you. And my child got off that chair faster than you have ever seen her move in her entire life. And I had a moment of like, oh my gosh, is this where all of these things come from? It's just parents trying to scare their kids. Like, if you're not back before dark, Bigfoot's going to get you.
I tell you what, I would have
Yeah,
gotten out of the
absolutely.
chair. That's terrifying.
So I
The chair
accidentally might have
monster.
used it on a friend's kid later that week, and she had to leave the party. She was so scared. Whoops.
So if you think about it, she was basically saying Bigfoot will come out of a portal in that chair
Yeah.
and get your kid.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm
Mhm.
I'm pretty
Taken to the mothership.
yeah, it makes sense. I'm pretty ecstatic to see friend of the show, former guest
What's
Connor
up,
Flynn is
Connor?
with us tonight. What's up, y'all? I recognize that
What's up,
Bigfoot
Con?
behind him. Well, Dane, can you see his comment there? Is that a Bigfoot or a black bear back there? I'm pretty sure that's a Bigfoot.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's pretty pronounced there.
So I thought Connor would appreciate some of our topics tonight, and Connor actually will be appearing on one of our New Year's Eve top guest countdowns here pretty soon. I'm not going to spoil it for him, but pretty soon. And he says, Bigfoot and Portals, perfect timing, going to be on Spaced Out Radio tonight at
Oh,
midnight. No
cool.
way. Connor, if you can tell us how to tune into that, I'd appreciate you putting it up on the screen. I'll add it to the show. And we're speaking to special guest Dane Beck, adventurer, outdoorsman, man of many tales. And CJ, you heard me mention from the article that came out this week, Bizarre Cases of Bigfoot and Portals to Other Dimensions, written by Brent Swanser in Mysterious Universe, that there was one of the cases was Gene, who called in to our good buddy George Norrie at Coast to Coast AM. Some of our listeners know that our production company, Coma Toast Tacos, is a perfect anagram of Coast to Coast AM. And Dane himself is a fan of Coast to Coast AM. Is that right, Dane? You had some childhood memories?
Well, absolutely. I've got a lot of childhood memories. So my grandmother, she was actually my stepmom's mom, but she was my grandma. I called her Nanny, but Lenora Sandoni, and Lenora Sentovich was her name. And she was a fascinating woman, Sicilian descent. And at my dad's ranch, for several years, she would come up in the summertime and stay and help my stepmom and my dad around the ranch. And she was kind of a dreamer and a drifter. At one point, she had her whole family in a bus, and they traveled across the United States and into British Columbia, panning for gold. They sold the bus at one point and ended up in Naples, Florida, I think in the 60s. And her husband, my grandpa Tony, had a stone crab boat, and they were all stone crabbers for quite a while. But she was a diehard coast to coast, AM radio lover. And so one summer at our ranch, she came up in her Subaru, and we had plenty of room, had a bedroom, everything for her, but she wanted to sleep in the Subaru. And she had it all decked out with a mattress in the back and little curtains. And as I've said, the ranch is pretty remote, so you don't really get any radio stations. They don't come in clear at all. But so we parked in this area with this tree, and I must have been 10, 11 years old, and once in a while I'd camp out in the Subaru with her. And I feel like Coast to Coast would start up around midnight at that time. And we actually wrapped wire around her car antenna and ran it up into a tree branch and had this big, like, tinfoil bulb on the end to improve the
Looks
the
like
radio.
Tim's current car.
And sometimes I'd fall asleep. Yeah, and she would wake me up, at midnight, and we'd listen. And she loved Art Bell, loved him to death. I mean, she was religious listener of his probably as long as he was doing radio, and then of course George Norrie. So we had a lot of these discussions growing up, and and if you went to the library with her, I mean, she was going to the UFO section.
Yeah.
So I got versed pretty well through her at a young age, and some people thought she was a little out there, but I mean, she was the most fun grandma you could have.
Sounds like it.
She sounds amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Former guest Connor Flynn, speaking of Coast to Coast AM, a great radio show, says he's going to be on Spaced Out Radio tonight. I encourage all of our listeners to tune in at midnight tonight. I'm sure that'll be on demand afterwards as well, hosted by Dave Scott. I guarantee you, CJ can attest to this, if you listen to a Connor Flynn interview, you'll never forget it.
Never forget it. Whew, he's got lots of ideas, lots of knowledge on all kinds of things. It's actually really incredible. I don't know how he holds it all in his brain.
Yes.
But before we
But so is our guest tonight.
So before we started the show, Dane, you were telling me a little bit about some of your fishing experience, and you would have to be out in the great, vast, wide open with the skies above you and nothing else while doing that. Tell us a little bit about that time, and did you have any UFO sightings? Any crazy experiences while you're out there?
Well, I worked about 13, 14 years offshore. I'd spent a lot of years on tugboats. I spent a lot of years commercial fishing. 6 years in Alaska, not full years. I'd be there like May to October. But basically, all that time spent offshore. A lot of times within sight of land, and I did some stuff deep offshore too, where you were days from seeing land. One particular season, I was actually on an albacore boat. Started in the North Pacific, and this boat was called the Seven Daughters. It was an old Gulf shrimp boat. Looked about like the Forrest Gump boat, the Jenny. It was called the Seven Daughters, and it had been converted into a high seas tuna trawler. Well, the captain of the boat at the time, his name was Paul House, and I've looked him up and everything since then. This would have been, I think, about '07. And I can't find him. And he was one of those dudes who he literally spent 10 months out of the year on the
Wow.
vessel, and he'd take 1 or 2 months off, and he'd go to like Thailand with a lot of money and probably spend $500, $1,000 a day, and who knows what he did. We probably
Right.
don't want to know. But on the boat, I mean, he was just made. He was he was a fisherman. He was a seaman. Definitely a rough character, definitely a little crazy, but I mean, knew the ocean, knew birds, knew fish. I mean, that's what he did. And in certain genres of life, he was a rock star. He was a legend. And he was a big UFO conspirator. And I don't necessarily I want to use the word conspirator. He was just a big fan, very educated, very knowledgeable of UFOs. And he supposedly had countless sightings. Now, this particular boat that he was on, they were always, when they're on the fishing grounds, they could have been 200 miles from shore up to 2,000
Oh,
miles from
wow.
shore. And it's what you do, and they'd be chasing albacore tuna fish. And so in the summer months, it'd be in the North Pacific around the 45th parallel. And as it turned winter, it gets just too rough to fish, and then the schools break up. So then you take the boat to the South Pacific, to the 45th in the south. So that's one end of the globe to the other. And so his big theory, or he not theory, I mean, he witnessed with his own eyes, was lots when you're fishing, the albacore schools can be really large, but there's also skipjack tuna fish, and these schools sometimes can be like 2 miles in diameter, and these are big fish. These are 10 to 25 pounds, and just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them when they're breaking the surface on a nice day, and there's birds, and there's all the bait fish there, and they're hitting the bait fish. I mean, it's a spectacle. And he'd said he'd seen your classic flying saucers come out of the water, go over the schools, hover above the schools, and suck the skipjack tuna fish right out of the
What?
water. So I'm just decimate these schools. And he had a lot of stories on it. I mean, out of the little library he had on that book, on that boat, it had a lot of random books, but there was probably 25 different UFO related books. So he'd educated himself, and I mean, I didn't really have a reason to lie, especially to us, who just worked
Right.
for him. And if he was drinking or whatever, it was at some point pretty quickly, it was going to get into the UFO tales. And he could be pretty tough one to work with. So some guys would just kind of roll their eyes just because it was coming from him. They didn't want to hear the stories anymore. So anyways, so my personal experience, stop me if this carries on too long. I'll try to condense it a little bit.
I do want to interject to a real Dane before you
Yeah.
tell us your personal experience. So when Dane first told me about his captain's theory of the UFOs following the schools of fish and seeing them suck the fish up into the UFO, I tell you what, it blew my mind. I thought this is an epic story. I have never heard this sort of UFO information relayed before, and it's so wild that it has to be accurate. You know what I mean?
Well, and this guy was a pretty credible guy, and nobody was more credible at fishing. I mean, really nobody in all the fleets in fishing, deep offshore albacore tuna fish. And when I say offshore, like I said, I mean, so for example, I'd gotten on the boat at one point in the North Pacific, and the weather had gotten really bad, and we were in the Columbia River, which is a giant river. Most of you probably know it, separates Oregon and Washington. We were in Astoria, Oregon, and we just gotten hit with like 2 or 3 weeks of just horrendous weather, and we had to get the boat to the South Pacific. And finally one day they're like, okay, batten everything down, tie everything down, we're going. And when we merged from the Columbia River into the Pacific, it was erupting. And we had to go straight west for about 3 straight days before we could even start going south. And our destination was Pongo Pongo, American Samoa. The island's called Tutuila. And so we were in, rough, bad, tough weather. And we finally started making our way south and went past Mexico, past Hawaii, past the equator. So at this point, it'd probably been 20 some odd days without even seeing a light in the sky from an airplane. I mean, we didn't see another boat. I didn't see a piece of trash in the water, just birds, some fish, and that was it. And we used to go in watches. When we were just running the boat, we'd have like 4-hour watches where you would be at the wheel and you'd be watching the autopilot, and you have to do little adjustments in a degree starboard, a degree port, wind, current, whatever, can throw you off your course a little bit. And I believe I was like 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., I think, when I had my watch every day. But I was asleep in my bunk around 1 or 2 a.m., and the guy who was the only guy awake who was at the wheel, his name was Michael Girona. He was a Filipino guy. And he woke me up. He said, "Hey, Danny, come look at this." So, we'd already heard lots of UFO tales from Captain Paul House. So I go with Michael to the wheelhouse, and he's like, "Look up there." And we're just south of the equator. There's nothing out there, but it's a starry night. But hovering, it looked like 400 yards above us was just this, I would say, like a rotating ball of lights, green, red, kind of halogen colored lights, had a hue, and it was like rotating, like almost like blinking Christmas lights would, kind of in a rhythm, but basically just hovering. And that's all we could really see was the lights. Couldn't see really an outline of a structure. It was dark out, but we watched it and watched it and watched it. I mean, probably for 30 or 40 minutes. And and it didn't move. It looked like it was just hovering. From what we could tell, it's hard. Like, for all we know, maybe it was 3 miles away, but it sure seemed like it was less than half a mile. It seemed pretty dang close. The lights were just bright and large. And we just couldn't make anything out beyond that. But the remarkable thing is that it was just holding its position. And we had the captain take a look at it, and he just shrugged his head and said, "Oh yeah, I see him all the time." And my initial thing was like, "Well, is it a weather balloon?" He's like, "No, a weather. You'd see movement in a weather balloon." And it looked too large to be a weather balloon. It would, unless it was like a hot air balloon sized balloon. But all we saw were the lights, and it was so remote. I mean, I think that the next body of water that we passed was a small French islands called Kiribati. So we weren't. I mean, we were thousands of miles from any type of Air Force base. You can see everything on the radar and also on the ship tracker to see where ships were. And I mean, we were in as remote of an area as you could possibly be on the planet Earth. And when you look at remote countries, all the South Pacific countries are all like the most remote. They're the farthest from another body of land. They're the farthest from a continent. And so we were out there. So it just, it wasn't like, I don't know, somebody's homemade aircraft off the coast or something. And it had to be, just to maintain its position and just the amount of electricity to put off the light that it did. So that so I would say that was my UFO sighting.
Was there any sound?
No sound. Nope. I mean, also we had we didn't cut the boat off. We had the engines going on the boat, which so if we were to cut it and it was silent, and there's still the, you know, kind of the lapping of the ocean
Right.
that you could hear. So yeah, no sound.
Was the boat moving?
Not really anything. Just big. The boat
And
was
so
moving.
did it
Yeah.
seem like it was moving with you, or was it stationary and you were moving away from
No,
it?
I don't think so. No, we were moving
Oh,
towards
okay.
it. Um, and yeah, and it, like I said, maintains position. Now, when we're on this boat, so we took this from the Columbia River all the way to that island. I feel like it was something like 35 days of traveling, and the reason it took so long is because we're not going very fast. We're just depending on the current. We were between 6 and 8 knots. A knot is 1.2 miles an hour, so we were probably going 7 or 8 miles
Mhm.
per hour. So it wasn't like seeing it like if you were, doing 70 on the highway or in an airplane. We were going pretty, almost out like a jogging speed, just cruising in the ocean, but nothing around but those lights. Um,
Wow.
I wish I could have say that. I mean, I saw a lot of fish and a lot of big schools of fish. I would have loved to witness, a craft harvesting fish from the ocean.
Yeah.
Didn't.
But this one wasn't sucking fish up.
No, no, but on the tail end of a lot of UFO stories from a pretty wild character, about as wild of a dude you can meet. And like I said, he'd get to when we were in port. This Captain Paul would get to drink in early afternoon, and pretty soon you're going to get some tales. So we'd heard a lot of them, and then there you know it. On on his boat, we're looking at some type of UFO.
Right. I just love his response. "Oh, yeah, I say that all the time. Why'd you wake me up?"
Ju-
Yeah, yeah, and that was basically it. And we went to bed with it still up there. Like I was like, okay, well,
Wow.
I got to be up, on watch in an hour, so I'm gonna catch me, a little more sleep.
So, yeah,
Um,
that was gonna be my
That would be
next
hard to
question. Did
do.
it just disappear? Did it fly off? But it sounds like you guys watched it as long as you could and thought, "All right, it hasn't killed us yet, so guess I'll go to bed."
yeah, yeah, no, because so and I got up like an hour later. It's still being pretty dark, and at that point, I think we'd had passed it. Um, I don't remember, exactly how it went. It was like I said, stationary for basically the whole time, and we watched it until we went to bed. Um, so I guess it just kind of faded.
Hmm.
Listener George Winters has a good point. Why have I never seen a weather balloon? According to the government, they're everywhere. That's so
Those
true.
weather ones.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen one.
So Dane, I have to ask you, and we've talked to a lot of UFO people. The lights, would you describe them in your memory? Were they blinking, pulsating, or neither?
Um, no, I would say like, what do you what's the word, like chasing?
Yeah, like you said, on the
Like
Christmas lights that go and come back.
moving in a circular motion where green to red to like halogen to green to red to halogen type thing. So I mean, there was definitely movement in the lights.
Could you see a reflection in the water?
Couldn't see a reflection. That's like it wasn't close. The lights weren't. I mean, they were obviously bright enough to see distinctly, but not close enough to where we, where we felt like it could illuminate the water or illuminate us. And it could be also, maybe they're not that type of light, where it's casting a big
Mhm.
projection, but but prominent and clear.
One thing that's come to light, no pun intended, with a lot of recent revelations from the military is encounters with USOs, so unidentified submersible objects. We're speaking of adventurer Dane Beck. Dane, did your captain ever tell y'all about seeing the UFOs go into the water or come out of the water?
Well, that was where he saw them. Yeah, he would see them, submerge from the water, or
Oh,
surface and submerge in and out of the water. And even, like I said, when they'd surface and they'd hover over these big schools of tuna, he said almost like vacuum light or projector like would, pull thousands of fish. Um, and I don't know, I guess it'd be 20 to 50 feet, above the surface of the water, and these fish would just come straight up into the, I don't know, the cargo
Man,
area of the ship, and they would go back down.
Gourmand from
Um,
Wildcrats needs that
you know,
technology.
yeah, and this is all
you
all
wild
his
rats
tales.
won't stop me from getting my gourmet dinner. That wasn't
Yeah,
exactly a French accent. But when Dane first told me about this fish revelation with the UFOs, actually, I didn't know what to make of it until tonight. And tonight, I've had an epiphany. I think I can make some sense out of why they would be harvesting fish. As we discuss an article written this week in Mysterious Universe by Brent Swanser titled Bizarre Cases of Bigfoot and Portals to Other Dimensions, which basically lays out the case for Bigfoot being an interdimensional alien being, for Bigfoot being the one piloting the UFOs, if you just shift your focus here from there being tiny green or gray beings on this UFO over the water to the beef jerky Sasquatch dude, a whole herd of them now in the UFO, it kind of makes a lot
Hungry
of
for
sense. They're
some
sucking
tuna.
up a bunch of fish. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you get that's a lot of muscle on the Sasquatch. You're gonna need a lot of protein.
They're pescatarians.
Hmm. Yeah, the gray race type classic alien too. They've kind of got the look of some type of like carnivorous fish that would feed off
Hmm.
of other fish or something.
Yeah. Those are some really great stories. Thank you for sharing those with us. So different than what we've heard so
Yeah, oh
far.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and a lot of the stories, about the fish and stuff were just stories told to me from another
Mhm.
guy. But he was definitely a believer, and I should try to do one more deep dive to see if we can find the old Paul House. He would just be a classic interview. Um, but
Oh,
I
consider
mean,
him on the
yes,
show
we
if you
need to
can
find
find him.
him.
well, I mean, I feel, yeah, I think it's been since 2008, give or take around there, and I just fell out of touch type deal. He lived pretty hard, and he was probably mid 50s back then.
Okay.
That would be an epic reunion. As a matter of fact, we might surprise you the next time you're on the show and just a little unexpected
Whole
reunion with
house
your former
writing it
captain there.
down.
Yeah, but he was a San Diego native. Yeah,
Oh,
San
listen to that.
Diego albacore fisherman. Mhm.
So I tell you what, CJ and Dane, it also makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of upset people in the military right now that have had encounters with USOs, unidentified submersible objects, and we've heard from pilots, that are sent out basically in helicopters, right? And they're lowered down into the water to recover different crafts that we may have had in the water, different things, drones, what have you, submersibles, and that they've been in the water when all of a sudden our technology gets sucked down into the depths by something unknown. But not totally unknown, because turns out their superiors know about the things happening. And you have to wonder, right, like if we got grizzled old fishing captains that know this is happening out there, there's probably somebody in the military knows about it too, right?
You would assume so.
Oh, absolutely. They probably are the most educated on it. But that's the age-old question: is why are they hiding it from us?
Oh, yeah. And it does remind me so much, it was on 60 Minutes, the military pilots who relayed about the encounters with an object in the water, and what Dane tells about, the encounters out over the ocean and sucking the fish up into the sky and maybe even sucking fish down into the depths or what have you. It totally rings true with what our own military pilots have told us.
Yeah, I mean, and there's been some recent ones too, I believe. Ones caught and recorded on
Mm-hmm.
radar.
And speaking of, I have to read this quote here. And this is a great quote and article, and everybody should check out the article, Bizarre Cases of Bigfoot and Portals to Other Dimensions. This is from paranormal researcher William Hall. And William Hall said, "It used to be that the UFO people didn't talk to the ghost people because they were a little weird, and nobody would talk to the Bigfoot people because they were crazy. I found out we cannot continue to do that. In reality, quantum physics is leading us there. That portals could be why we don't see any bodies, why there are no bones. I have no official opinion on it. I leave nothing off the table because there are a lot of things we find in our field work."
Yeah, and that's where we're here, all things unexplained.
Yes, absolutely. But it's so true. It's even myself, pre doing this show, I would have not thought twice about anybody that mentioned something about Bigfoot or UFOs or who knows what. But the more I've done this show and the more I've met people, it's unreal how many people have stories to tell and how many experiences there are out there. And yeah, we can't just brush this off as crazy, as he says, or like why are all of these people seeing things? Why are people that I know seeing things? Something is happening,
Right?
and it does seem to all be interconnected.
To be continued.
You've been listening to All Things Unexplained. If you liked this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you would like to hear more All Things Unexplained, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our show depends on the support of listeners like you. To help keep us going, please be sure to visit patreon.com/allthingsunexplained. Our Patreon patrons get early access to podcasts, as well as exclusive audio and video clips. Or you can find us on Venmo under the business accounts. Just look for @Bigfoot UFO. Additionally, you can support us at buymeacoffee.com/unexplained. If you can't get enough of us, go ahead and check us out at allthings-unexplained.com. A special thanks to our producer, director, sound mixer, editor, and the man who wears far too many hats. No, seriously, he wears a lot of hats. Dr. Tim Mounts. Without you, we couldn't keep the lights on. Thanks for listening to All Things Unexplained.